because the ADHD mind, once something becomes routine, you're just extra bored with it. You're not excited about it at all. So you do need like a challenge, which is also why like entrepreneurship and web design is actually a super good field to be in. So I luckily figured that out before I figured everything else out, but I'm at least in the right galaxy of what you can do. But like a lot of my past careers are all these jobs that are not good for ADHD people, which is kind of just staring at some numbers on a computer and whatnot. So I definitely had a lot of career changes.
Welcome to the Web Design Business Podcast with your host, Josh Hall, helping you build a web design business that gives you freedom and a lifestyle you love.
Hello, friend. Great to have you here. We are going to dive into what is definitely a sensitive topic, but is also an important one. And for many reasons, it's important to me personally because I have found as a coach of hundreds of web designers, a very common topic and theme, both in my community Web Designer Pro and privately in the confidential private messaging that I do for members and coaching that I do, is ADHD. This term has been mentioned more and more and more and more over the past couple of years. So it's something I wanted to address and take a deep dive into here on the podcast. Now, I didn't really want to dive into this world because I don't know anything about it with like an expert. I wanted to talk with somebody who I have a relationship with and who can talk at a casual level about this as we dig into this. So I'm really excited to bring on Web Designer Pro member and a good friend of mine, Rob Chaplin, who was officially diagnosed in the last year with ADHD. And he is early in the journey, but he's very passionate about sharing what he's learned and most importantly, what has helped him with his ADHD. So that's exactly what we're going to get into in this one. We're going to look at the red flags that caused Rob to look into what was going on with him as he was starting his business. Because side note, web design is an industry that just promotes ADHD-like behavior with the amount of things we're managing and bouncing back between different platforms and all the stuff. So he was already kind of prone to having ADHD symptoms on top of, building a business and getting into web design. So we're really going to dive into what he did over the past year to start making progress and feeling more focused, feeling more productive, and having just a better emotional state as he's building up his business. We are going to get into how creative fields like web design are actually great for people who do bounce between different things like web designers do, and how ADHD can actually be a superpower in many ways if you channel it, depending on where you are on the spectrum. So I really hope that this conversation helps you. And we do have a ton of resources at the show notes for this episode at joshhall.co/364. Rob has actually put together an incredible detailed PDF that I highly recommend you check out. It's free. You don't have to even send an email in or anything. You can just go to the show notes, joshhall.co/364 to check that out, which will help you out. Rob, again, is a personal friend of mine. Rob and I actually used to be tennis partners in high school, and it was great to get reconnected over the past couple of years and to see what he's done. So can't wait to hear how this helps you out. Lastly, disclaimer, Rob is sharing his journey, the methods that have helped him, the strategies, and even some medications that have worked for him. But this episode is not medical advice. We are not, thank God, medical professionals. So do not take anything you hear as medical advice. Consult with your physician or your doctor before making any interest in medication. So, disclaimer, heads up, we are not doctors, but we are web designers and we are working through this topic of ADHD in this conversation. Enjoy. Well, Robbie, how are the turntables?
How's it going?
From the tennis court to the online world, my God, almost 20 years later. That's kind of wild. Oh, it is 20 years later.
You don't have to mention it.
Wow. This year is literally 20 years since the best doubles partner pair in Central Ohio was on the court.
Yeah, that championship was fun to win,
I think we won one game, didn't we?
Oh, we crushed it.
Remember that?
I remember plenty of wins, Josh. I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, yeah, I like
trophies. You don't have to go in. We're humble. Don't go into the details. We did good.
Living in rose-colored glasses, remembering back. I like it. Well, yeah, dude, Rob, man, I'm so pumped to chat with you for many reasons here. First of all, on a serious note, dude, it is really cool to see you not only stick with web design when you got into it less than a couple of years ago, but you're up to some awesome stuff, dude.
Yeah.
So I have to say publicly, I mean, you're one of my good friends, but I have to say it's freaking awesome to see you commit to this thing.
Yeah, much appreciated. And I definitely appreciate all your help getting here. So the funny part is originally when I had reached out to you, I didn't know you were actually teaching web design. So I was just trying to get some information and you're like, yeah, I'll just throw it in my next pod. And I was like, that's a really weird response, but whatever. And then I was like, oh, he's like teaching web design now. So actually how the worlds aligned, it was kind of the perfect person to reach out to at the time. So definitely appreciate all your help and your pro course has been helping a lot. So it's been awesome, man. Awesome ride for sure.
Heck yeah, dude. Just getting started. I forgot that's how it originally started. Yeah, you had some great questions about, I think, just entrepreneurship and web design. And then because on my personal Facebook and stuff, I really don't talk about business much at all.
Yeah.
And so I completely, I forget that most people in my personal network probably don't even know what I do. So
yeah, it was pretty funny. Your response was like, yeah, I'll just do a podcast about that. And I was thinking like, oh, okay, that sounds good. I guess. I was like, sure, that's fine. But the podcast was very helpful. So here I am now. So it works.
There we go. Yeah. I'm just going to make a podcast of these great questions and then force you to buy my bundle at the time. And then here we are a couple years later. So.
Yep, you got me good. No.
Well, speaking of squirrel, different topic, we're going to talk about ADHD today. Now, this is what's interesting, Robbie, because can I call you Robbie still? It still feels weird for me to call you Rob. What do you go by normally?
I usually go by Rob, but Robbie's fine. Either one. I'm pretty relaxed.
Roberto sounds good. Yeah, so Roberto, it's interesting. Honestly, what's interesting about this topic is you and I have had some conversations about this in pro meetups because you're local here in Columbus, off camera, but I have seen the term ADHD in my coaching, like very, very prevalent in my world so much the past couple years in particular. It was something I didn't anticipate as far as how many people on the coaching tier and pro tell me like I'm ADHD it's just a term that's thrown around a lot. So one reason I wanted to chat with you is to be kind of a bit of a sponge on this topic, because it's anytime somebody tells me I'm ADHD and I struggle with this and this, sometimes I'm like, I don't know what to say other than like, I look at the symptoms of ADHD and I'm like, join the club. Like I struggle with all of these things, self-diagnosed, of course, but I know that there's a very big spectrum of this. And I'm probably, again, I'm setting this as the foundation because I'm coming into this topic and this idea thinking pretty ignorant to what I know of this space. All I know is I would think that social media and technology is naturally going to rewire us and change our brains to be a little more ADHD with how fast we consume information and how quick things come in and go out. So I understand that, but I also get that there are like varying degrees of this. Yeah. And some of the stuff that you talked to me about in our last pro meetup locally, I was like, wow, I didn't even think about that. Yeah. So,
and I was telling you, I've recently been diagnosed, so I'm no expert. So everybody do your own research, but I'm just going to kind of share, my side of it. Cause I honestly thought, so I got diagnosed about 5 or 6 months ago with ADHD. And my thoughts were kind of like yours currently, where it's just like, well, yeah, like everybody's got problems with that or whatnot. Or you think of the kid, when I thought of ADHD before I knew I had it, you think of the hyperactive kid running around the classroom that like can't pay attention. They've got a lot of thoughts. And that's like the main type of ADHD you think of. But after getting diagnosed and, kind of researching into it and getting strategies, you realize that there's definitely varying degrees of ADHD, and there's a lot of symptoms that like I never knew was associated with ADHD. So super interesting topic to learn about. And I just thought I'd at least share some of the information I've learned, and hopefully it can help someone else out, because I was definitely in a weird space trying to figure all this out. And once I learned I had ADHD, it really it's like mind blowing for me. Cause I'm like, oh, that is why I'm doing all these different things. So it's like super interesting topic, but yeah.
Well, and before we dive into how this all started for you, this journey, I also want to point out that like you sent me an incredible in-depth overview and PDF of this, which I'll make sure we include in the show notes for this one. But so thank you for that. I was like, wow, dude, this is like a little masterclass you wrote out. But one thing that surprised me is how many benefits of ADHD that there are, particularly in our world of web design and entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
It almost gives people with varying degrees of ADHD, I feel like, a bit of a superpower because we can hyper focus on something if we like it.
Yeah, exactly. And
so,
go ahead. Yeah, I was going to say there's a plenty of positives with it. The negatives come in if you don't know you have it or don't have strategies to help yourself out, because then you can kind of compound some problems over time, and that can kind of send you down the wrong road. But once you know you have it or have strategies, even if you don't, even just like strategies, even if you don't have it, can be helpful. So yeah, once you have the strategies in place, it can become like very beneficial to have. And especially in a creative industry, like it's a lot of creative people have it. So
I feel like too, it's probably a matter of knowing yourself and knowing, I don't know if the right terminology is like triggers or just getting yourself into situations that are just not going to end well. So for you, like what was the start of this? Did somebody say like, dude, you should get tested, or what made you even want to take a professional route towards this?
Yeah. So, well, people over time have told me you have ADHD, and I just was like, well, yeah, everyone's got ADHD. It was kind of my thought process at the time. Cause I'm like, as a kid, I might've been hyperactive, but I was never like, the kid interrupting everything. And as you grow with ADHD, so there's a couple different types you can have, and you can have pieces of each of them. So the main one you're going to think of is that hyperactive type, which is going to be like the kid in class that's running around. They get diagnosed young, but a lot of women get diagnosed later in life because they don't have that hyperactive part. And also people like myself who don't really have a lot of the hyperactive part can get diagnosed late. And that's because the main one we have is going to be the inattentive type, which is kind of like the daydreamer. So you think of the kid in class that just is, doing the proper stuff. They get their homework done, but they are definitely like kind of in outer space during some topics that maybe bore them or don't get them as excited. And then the third one that you can have is going to be the impulsivity. So you can have bits and pieces of each of these. And like you said, it is a spectrum. So it's like autism. There's a spectrum of it. So you can have some of these signs are more predominantly one or the other. But when I got diagnosed, I was more inattentive, but I did have symptoms of all of them. So the final one's impulsivity. So this is kind of like acting without thinking or not being able to kind of control your own, like you're blurting out answers or whatnot, which I definitely can do from time to time. But what really led me to kind of getting professional help or trying to figure it out more was, now that I've researched more, it was like, if you're diagnosed as an adult, it's either because your kid, it's like a very genetic trait to have. So your kid has it, and then you realize, oh, I actually have all these symptoms as well. Like you've just learned to cope with it a different way. And then the other way that usually you get diagnosed is you kind of hit like a kind of chaotic state that you're in, where you're compounding problems of ADHD over time, and it just reaches a state where it's like not exactly manageable. So for mine, once I started to research things, and I wasn't looking for ADHD at the time, but like definitely I was having some problems with starting a business that added stress into your life, which we all know as business owners can be, like just an extra added stress you weren't ready for. And I was definitely having problems kind of I knew I needed to plan stuff out better, but I could not figure out like, why can I not plan this out? Or like, why is getting this started being so difficult? And I was kind of getting to a state where I'm like, am I going crazy right now? Because I know this is a very important thing to do. I'm, for some reason, having a really hard time starting it or getting it completed. So that was one of the big driving forces, was like, I feel like my life's a little bit out of control. So it's kind of a chaotic state that you can get into to try to figure it out. So with the ADHD brain, just in general. So, sorry, I'm kind of going all over the place. You can see my ADHD kicking in right now as I.
I was preparing for it. Sorry, I'll try to keep the jokes to a bit.
Oh no, you're fine. So, just in general, so like what ADHD? It's just a neurological condition that causes executive dysfunction. And then executive function, for people that don't know or are new to this or whatnot, is kind of like the CEO of your brain. So it's taking in all the information, organizing it, and kind of helping you set up goals. So if you got some dysfunction in there, like I said, it can kind of compound over time.
So execution, that word right there makes sense, to where if you are struggling a lot with that, then it's probably the actual, is it like focus and execution of getting something done, I would imagine.
Yeah. And it's
maybe a red flag or something.
Yeah. So like the red flags for me was for sure, like I just knew you know it's important. You knew you needed to get this done, but you just can't get to the finish line kind of thing. So I was having problems with that. And then a lot of people with ADHD have that don't know they have ADHD for sure, have like a more negative self-talk in their head. Because if you have ADHD as a kid, it's said like by the time you're 10, you have 20,000 more like corrections, or not like negative things, but people like correcting you like, oh, you actually need to be doing this, or you're getting in trouble for different things. So it kind of is in the back of your mind and you don't know it. So like as a coping strategy, you're a little more worried about making mistakes than the average person. So I was definitely having like more negative self-talk. So when I started researching things, it was more like on like a minor depression. I was like, I don't feel like I'm like a depressed person, but something's a little off. So I started researching kind of like minor depression symptoms. And then it led me to undiagnosed adult ADHD. And when I read those symptoms, I had like everything. I was like, oh, this is making a lot of sense. So like, if I could go through a little bit of my life, they were like, I wrote some of them down here, but it's like, if you have undiagnosed ADHD, so pretty much your brain's lacking some dopamine and norepinephrine. So an ADHD brain is lacking dopamine. It's pretty much the reward system of doing things. So the ADHD brain, without you knowing it, is seeking exciting stuff. So it wants the instant gratification. That's why people with ADHD get distracted by things, because they're like,
that also, side note, I feel like that also makes sense why you in particular were probably having a lot of struggles in the beginning with the business, because there's very little instant gratification when you start a business until you get your first client or you get a first website up.
Right, for sure. So, and you're like in a new realm you don't know about. So it's kind of tricky to navigate that without like an official, because like every path's different. So it's kind of a tricky thing to navigate. So you're at like higher risk for kind of riskier behavior without you even knowing it, because you get bored a lot easier than people, and you get distracted a lot easier than people, because that dopamine rush is what your body's kind of craving, just to get to like the average person's dopamine levels. So with that, I'm like reading through all these like, hey, if you might have ADHD as an adult and you don't know it, like here's some things you could have. One of them was you can end up in some financial problems, which when I was younger, I definitely did. I moved, well, because you like new and exciting stuff, I moved to Spain to teach English, new and exciting. Didn't really plan that out though. So eventually went into some credit card debt. So I was like, all right, check that one off. Exciting experience, but not fully planning it out. So you can end up in some like, financial problems. And then another one was like, you're going to have a lot of career changes, which I can definitely check off as well. And that's because the ADHD mind, once something becomes routine, you're just extra bored with it. You're not excited about it at all. So you do need like a challenge, which is also why like entrepreneurship and web design is actually a super good field to be in. So I luckily figured that out before I figured everything else out, but I'm at least in the right galaxy of what you can do. But like a lot of my past careers are all these jobs that are not good for ADHD people, which is kind of just staring at some numbers on a computer and whatnot. So I definitely had a lot of career changes. And then, you get into your 30s and you're like, okay, this doesn't make sense why I'm still having all these career changes and stuff. So it's kind of in the background. But yeah, there's just a bunch of just a bunch of things that started to make sense as I'm reading down like undiagnosed adults. And so that led me to like seek some help and see if I officially had it or not, and then get help from there. So it was an interesting route.
That's a great overview. Yeah. Very fascinating. Great overview. The different types of ADHD is really interesting too, with like, naturally, I think everyone thinks about, like you said, the wild kid at school who just can't sit still. But I was definitely, if I self-diagnosed myself, I was definitely in the daydreamer category, to where like I didn't have those hyper things, but I definitely, a lot of things you mentioned so far, I'm like, oh my gosh, I absolutely relate to that. I mean, I've talked to a few members of our community pro about this who have had some conversations with. I'm like, man, thank God we have this as an option nowadays, because I freaking struggled with school.
Right.
I was like a solid low C student, barely got through it just because I had a real hard time on the concentration front too, especially when it came to things I wasn't interested in. The few subjects I really enjoyed, I killed at, and I loved it. But that sounds pretty common. So all that to say, what a wonderful world we live in, that we have this option. And like you mentioned, Robbie, like we all get bored. Once something works, it's like, okay, on to the next thing. As web designers, very often, the cool thing is like in a few years, you don't need to get a whole new career path. You could just launch a new wing of your business or a passion project or a new service or something. That's what I've learned as an entrepreneur, is like, I don't need to necessarily blow up a business. I can just do something different in it.
Yeah. And they said like an interesting stat I found was, first of all, so probably people in web design are higher risk of having ADHD because it's a super creative like thing to have. And also you're more adept to taking a risk because your mind kind of likes chaos, because that gets the dopamine levels going. So even without you knowing it, like just the risk of starting a business can keep your mind firing. So it's 7 times more likely if you have ADHD that you will be an entrepreneur compared to the average person. And then it's a very creative thing. Like you pretty much can't shut off the creative side of your mind compared to people. That, I think in my research, that was like the craziest thing I learned, was that they were saying like neurotypical people can say, okay, I've got a boring task, but tomorrow I'm going to do that boring task and I'll focus on it and kind of shut off and just like actually focus. And I didn't know at the time, but like ADHD people literally can't shut off the creative side of their brain. So as you're trying to do your boring task, your other side is just talking to you about cool and exciting stuff, which causes it, way harder to focus. So that was like actually the most mind-blowing thing I learned. I was like, wait, people don't just have random thoughts constantly like going through their head, like that don't even make sense with what you're doing, which is why you get kind of distracted. So that was like very interesting. They've done like CAT scans on people and said like ADHD brains are just firing different. Like there's just a lot going on in there, which make us extra creative, which is nice. But sometimes when you're trying to get to some task you don't want to do, it makes it extra hard.
Get stuff done. Or like, just that, like there are, as a business owner, there's just stuff you got to do that you don't want to do. It's very easy to push that off or get distracted from it. Again, I'm self-diagnosing here, but as you say that, literally just before this call, Robbie, I was working on some quote unquote boring stuff that I actually stopped just because I was like, I just don't feel like doing this now. I've got my mind's going over here. Like I'm again, a lot of different degrees of this and variations, but I imagine that a lot of people are like, yep, tell me more. So one thing that you shared with me as far as a bit of a red flag, or like something that was kind of brought to light about this, was you had mentioned that you had kind of struggled with vision, right? Like not literal vision, but like seeing the future or seeing the next road ahead. Yeah. That was something that was really interesting, because that's something that I don't experience. Like I am, I've gotten better and better at like seeing. Maybe this is just the muscle of being a business owner and entrepreneur for 15 years now, but I have gotten better at like seeing, like envisioning the next little way forward. But you had mentioned that was something that is pretty common and that you had experienced. Can you expand on that, with that idea of like, it seemed like it's almost about being in the now and being in the present, but having a hard time looking past that, right?
Pretty much from the research I've done, at least. Again, do your own research, people. But it's like the ADHD brain is like the now and the not now. So obviously you've got the classic procrastination. If you tell somebody with ADHD, hey, this is due next week, guess when they're going to do it? At 11 p.m. the night before, because they're not excited about it. But then because their brain gets a little chaos going, the dopamine rises, they can knock that out. But if you expand upon that with setting goals, I think the problem I was having at the time was like, I've got the big picture. Boom, that looks awesome to get to. Not setting out any steps of how to reach that big picture, or like, I have the big picture idea, but I wasn't doing a good enough job of setting those smaller, like realistic goals to hit along the way, which obviously causes problems within like a business or something like that. So that was like very interesting to learn about. So it's called like time blindness, where another thing that is time blindness that most people will be like, oh, I know a friend that does that, is like someone that can never show up on time. I don't have that one, but I know people that do, where they literally can't, like in their own mind, they really can't tell how long something's going to take. So when you say like, hey, I'll be there at 1, they're actually, and I was like, okay, this is interesting to me because I'm always an on time person, but they're actually like really trying to get there at 1 and they get distracted doing something else. They think it's going to take 5 minutes. It takes 20. They're 20 minutes late to your meeting or whatnot. So that's like just a different style of time blindness, but which I do think I struggle with as far as tasks, like as far as like how long I think a task will take. Like some days, especially before I knew I had all this, I'd be like, I'm going to complete 7 things today, no problem. Then you run into like a couple problems you didn't see coming. It takes like 8 hours to do the first task. And then you kind of feel bad you didn't complete the 6 other tasks you thought you could. But it's more because your mind actually is just bad at kind of registering time estimations, which is a fun thing to do.
Yeah. And on that note, it's like, welcome to web design, where you're, that's like one of the biggest challenges. And honestly, this kind of goes back to the creativity aspect of this too, when it comes to a task that is not like, for example, changing oil in a car. That's something that's probably pretty easy to figure out. Unless there's an issue, it's probably safe to say like this is probably going to be 20 minutes or something. Like that's not going to deviate too much. A design of a homepage could deviate drastically from an hour to like 100 hours potentially. It really, and with creativity and creative work, you could literally go until like you could never stop. I was actually, this is very timely because I was just watching a little a video from one of the guitarists from Slipknot. And they were talking about songs and how you have to have deadlines for bands and creating albums, because otherwise you would never stop working on songs.
Right.
There's quotes in the music world that a song is never done. It's just shipped at a certain point. And I feel like in the creative work, that has to hold true as well. Yeah. It's like deadlines and time blocks are everything.
Right.
So I'd imagine in the case of any variants of ADHD, that's even more important. Is just like you have a certain amount of time in this window. There's probably some deliverables, but you just have to get it done. I would imagine that would help in the case of time expansion.
Yeah. And that's kind of the dangerous part. If you don't know you had ADHD when you started a business, is you're the one now regulating when stuff's due, which is trickier when you also have the procrastination. Like when you like that aspect too, it's like, yeah, that's when you like, I think over the summer before I was getting all this, I was kind of running into that where I'm like, oh shoot, like, wait, I need to get this done. Like you're just not managing your time well. So yeah, that's like the positive of being an entrepreneur is that you're setting your own hours. And for like a person with ADHD, that's really good because they don't really run on the same type of system that like society is kind of built around neurotypical people. So the ADHD mind, which a lot of creative people have, like they might want to work at night compared to in the morning or do this and that, especially with a creative job. Like you kind of have those spurts of like when you're feeling really creative to do stuff. So the positive is you can work your own hours and everything, but then the negative is you're also the one setting like the standard of like, okay, this needs done by now, and then you're the one punishing yourself. So it's like especially if you're a little confused if you have it or not, you're like, oh man, I'm not hitting some of these milestones I've been trying to hit. So yeah.
I could absolutely see, with no like deadline or weekly task, I could see everything just completely running everywhere. Especially for, like when you started your business, as you just said, it's like suddenly you go from previous careers where you probably had somebody telling you need to get this done at this time or have some deadlines. Even school, you have deadlines for stuff. And then suddenly, when no one else is in control of those deadlines, you have to be the one to make them. So it's like a whole separate job description. Sorry, by the way, everyone. It's a job description. You didn't know you're also the micromanager. But the reason I say that is I feel like it's probably, I would imagine, good to have some sort of like common task or something that's routine. And like for me, that was my networking group. No matter what happened every week, I was at my networking group. You're in the same networking group now, or the same brand. And like that helped me, I know and actually Jen, my VA, who has opened up about her ADHD struggle. She actually said the VA work that she does for me for this podcast is kind of a grounder for her because it gives her a weekly deadline. She knows when she plans around it, and then other tasks kind of fit around that.
Yeah.
So has that kind of thing helped you as well as you've navigated this?
Yeah, for sure. And obviously, just overall getting more organized and everything like that. But definitely, when you have like a weekly meeting or whatnot that's always on the books, it definitely is a helpful reminder of like what you need to get done before that meeting. And give you some, I can definitely go over some strategies later that have been found super helpful. But it's kind of funny. The ADHD mind absolutely hates kind of like the standard things like what am I trying to think of the word? Like a schedule, more or less. Like the ADHD mind finds that very boring. But to actually improve ADHD, you need a schedule. So that's
makes sense. No, that makes sense. Did you, real quick, because I do want to get in these strategies if you're down for it. When you decided to seek professional help, did you just like go to your doctor and say, what you kind of pinpointed yourself based off of self-research? Or are there like ADHD professionals exclusively? Like, how did that?
Yeah, actually, I don't think I included it in the first PDF, but I'll send it to you. So I actually had a friend that had been diagnosed late, like with ADHD, maybe like a year or two before me. So I just reached out to him like, hey, how did you do this type thing? So you can either like go to your doctor in person and try to figure it out that way. But how he explained it to me, which again, do your own research, was that can be like a more timely kind of process. And so I actually went through an online, let me see what it's called real quick. But I went through like an online assessment, and then it's given to a psychiatrist who then will call you, kind of talk through things to analyze you, and then give you like an official, like if you have ADHD or whatnot. But the one I use, which I'll send you this info, is called Mantiva Health. So pretty much you do like a big online assessment, then somebody like a psychiatrist reviews that assessment, and then they'll also like live chat with you to kind of more assess. Because the one thing with ADHD, there is some comorbidities with it, which would be anxiety and depression. So those are really highly linked. So they also want to make sure like they're diagnosing the right thing and you don't just have anxiety or depression. Because anxiety kind of stems from, again, being corrected a bunch as a kid. You in your mind are now thinking of all the outcomes possible, and you want to choose like think of someone with anxiety is worried about a lot of stuff. And with ADHD, it's because like, oh, I've been yelled at before for doing this wrong. Like, I got to make sure I do this right. So they're overanalyzing everything. And then the depression side, which I felt like my symptoms were more that side, is more just like kind of negative self-talk. Because again, when you're a little kid, like not on purpose or anything, but you're just getting corrected more than most people. So you're trying to like make sure you're doing everything right. So,
Gotcha.
They do say that ADHD is the most underdiagnosed and overdiagnosed type of like diagnosis you can have, because college kids want the medicine to study for exams, the classic person getting Adderall for exams. But most people don't know they have it because it's more or less a newer, like, I don't think anyone knew about it very much until the 90s. So it's like a very new kind of diagnosis to receive. But they said about like 5% of the population probably has ADHD. But it's kind of it's hard to like regulate exactly like all the meds and everything, because a lot of college kids are like trying to fake it to get the medicine. So kind of interesting stat.
As somebody who's early in the journey in this, how do you feel about the technology side of thing? Like, again, going back to, my thoughts just with technology as a whole, I imagine that has to be a huge contributing factor, even if it's not somebody who may be hereditary. Yeah. Or if it's not something as hereditary per se. Like, I mean, I've definitely found myself in seasons and points needing to like reduce scrolling and needing to reduce like the amount of information I'm taking in, or just jumping back and forth between stuff. And that does seem to help when I like put my focus on longer strings of focus. Like, what's your thoughts on technology and how this?
Well, technology is obviously an immediate dopamine rush. So that would be not as good for people easily distracted, because you can either be working on this boring task, or you can watch an NBA highlight over here that looks kind of cool. You can go through a rabbit hole that way. So I think social media overall for anybody's mental health is probably not the best, but especially if you're easily distracted, because that is like an immediate dopamine release, which is what ADHD brains are striving for, is just getting back up to a normal level of dopamine. So I think that can definitely be a bad factor into distractibility for sure. I'm not a huge social media guy, so I feel like I luckily don't have too crazy of an urge, but there's definitely like moments where you're like, whoa, I've been scrolling on Instagram for like 30 minutes for no reason really. So it's just like kind of having self-awareness to kind of lock. I've been like just leaving my phone in the other room so I can get stuff accomplished, but I would say that's definitely not helping anybody. That's definitely like exacerbating the problems of ADHD.
So you just hit on like one little strategy there, which is just to remove notifications completely by not keeping your phone around you. Yeah. What are some of the other strategies practically like that that have helped you?
Let me get into them, Josh. I've been doing research for the last 6 months. First, I would like to say, for people that are thinking about if they have ADHD or think they might, like, medication is actually found super highly effective. So from like my own personal self, I got prescribed Adderall, which has been like super helpful, because it pretty much all Adderall is doing for ADHD people is raising your dopamine and dopamine levels back to a normal level. So they said it's not addictive, like for people with ADHD. If you don't have ADHD, they said like the only people found to be addicted to Adderall is neurotypical people, because they don't need that extra dopamine rush. They're like kind of doing, like when they take it, it's actually like doing a drug, because they're getting more dopamine than they need. So right now, as far as I could see, they didn't have like any long-term effects, because that's always worrisome when you're taking a medication, and it's not addictive. And it does really help like you focus compared. Like I can definitely tell, like when I took it the first time, which they do say like the first time you take it and you have ADHD and are just experiencing like one thought wave, it's like mind blowing, which it was. Like I remember I was just driving home from like a meetup, and I was like, whoa, I just literally only listened to a podcast. Like that was my only thought. That was the craziest thing, that like I was like mind blown that like I could literally have one trace thought. But with that, you do need the strategies, because still starting things and things like that, still a mission, but like you can actually stay on task. So if you do get diagnosed with ADHD, like medication is a good route, but then on top of that, you're going to need strategies, because it's not like the cure all, which for about a week you will think it is. You're like, oh, sweet, I can do anything. And then you're like, kind of start to run into some problems, and you're like, oh, I actually need strategies for this. So let me go over some strategies. One thing you can do, which I haven't done, but you can do cognitive behavioral therapy. So that's either through the psychiatrist, or you can actually get like an ADHD coach. So to kind of coach you through different strategies and things like that. So I haven't personally done that, but I have seen a lot of positives with that if you need some extra help.
Can you expand on cognitive behavioral therapy? Like, what are the kind of things that are under that?
Yeah. So with ADHD, like the main things that you're trying to kind of work on are going to be that executive function. And I can actually go through, there's like 7 main ones that people with ADHD struggle with. I can give you an example from my own life if you'd like.
Sure.
So yeah, let's go for it.
The floor is yours, Robbie. The floor is yours, man.
Dr. Rob's here. No biggie.
Dr. Chaplin.
Definitely put a warning. Do your own research on this one.
Disclaimer. Oh God, Dr. Chaplin's
Disclaimer. Dr. Chaplin's out of control. But all right. So there's 7 main executive functions that you might struggle with. And again, it's a spectrum. So it might not be everything. It might be some of them. So to start, the first one's going to be inhibition, which is just impulse control. So definitely like things I have problems with is like finishing other people's sentences. Like within like 2 words, you're like, I know what they're going to say. And you just kind of jump in and you're like, oh. And then like also with that, somebody could be telling a story and in my head, I'm like, oh, I need to tell them like, I've experienced this too or whatever. And you just jump in, you're like, oh, I'm just trying to like connect with this dude. And now he's like, what the hell's this guy doing?
So one-uppers.
Not one-uppers, but no, but just like kind of interrupting or just like a little bit of impulse control there, which I definitely have been working on. But they do say it's like a thing with ADHD. You can tell where this sentence is going. You almost want to just be like, here it is. Like, this is what you're trying to say. Yeah. So
I'll tell you one thing, starting a podcast is one of the best ways to help that out.
Yeah, I haven't noticed you interrupt me at all. Maybe people have noticed me interrupt you, but I'm getting better.
I was just going to say, Robbie, in all the years of hanging out with you, that's never been like a big thing that I was never like, Robbie will never let you finish the sentence. So that has not been something I've noticed out of control, but that's good to know.
Yeah,
it makes sense.
I appreciate it. And then self-awareness. So just kind of self-directed attention. So I would say with self-awareness, another thing that you can have, which I have, which is a fun one, is just spilling everything. Now that's fun because out of sight, out of mind, your mind just kind of forgets, hey, this is right in front of me. So I've definitely like spilled. I have like some horrifying stories of being little and spilling stuff and just being like mortified. And so that's a fun one, but definitely continues into my age now. But I'm trying to get a little better at spatial awareness. But I had a recent one in Denver, which was rough. I was visiting a friend and he had little dogs. I had like a glass of beer on the floor that it wasn't like a coffee table. I was like, oh, let me just move this so I can avoid spilling this beer from this dog. And I set it like on the edge, I'm not looking exactly. And it just spilled a full beer on his couch. And I was like, I'm the worst. I'm sorry about that. So you do run into some interesting scenarios.
Now I have to be honest here, Robbie, how much of that makes the spatial awareness absolutely makes sense with this, but how much is also just clumsy? Like, I guess I could feel like you could be a hard judge on yourself if you're thinking that every like one clumsy mistake is ADHD.
I can chalk up way more, but
so it's enough to be like, this isn't normal
problem. It's like when someone's like, this dude's clumsy, like you got to be at a level of clumsy.
So self-awareness, inhibition.
Yep. Working memory. So this is just kind of like your short-term memory, which definitely is a struggle. So this is forgetting your wallet, your keys, your watch, which I'm sure everyone has, but if it's an ongoing theme. Also, a big one that I have is I walk into a room, have no clue why I walked in. I remember I'm like looking for something, but why did I walk into this room type thing? So just kind of your short-term working memory can be affected. And then you got nonverbal working memory, which this one's is kind of back to like living in the like now or not now. So that's kind of like procrastination more or less. So you're only thinking of like, what's happening right now? What's the exciting thing? There's a squirrel. Awesome. But you're not thinking of like the future things. Mm-hmm. And then they also have emotional regulation. So I think I'm pretty lucky in this one because I guess some people with ADHD can have like, they're frustrated with themselves and they can kind of take it out on other people because they're just like kind of frustrated with what they've been up to. But also it's just like your brain's not firing exactly right. So you could be like hungry and kind of hangry, but you don't piece it together that, oh, I need to eat something and then I'll be fine. But I would say with ADHD, I would say like you can have high highs and low lows compared to a neurotypical brain as far as that goes, which in the entrepreneur field can be bad because like a rejection can feel way worse for someone with ADHD compared to not. So it is interesting there. And then I think I'm on number 5 or 6 maybe, but you got self-motivation. So just the ability to start a task. So again, when I was kind of struggling over the summer, I was really having like problems just like getting started. It's like a really weird feeling because this is important. I need to do this. But you almost think of like, again, like every possible pathway, what's the right path? And then you just don't do anything. And then it's like been a day and you're like, oh crap, I didn't accomplish what I needed to. So that's an interesting one. And then the final one that you can kind of struggle with is just planning and prioritizing. So this can happen again, I would say like as far as like web design, you're like, okay, I have this important task, but I also need to do this less important task, but I like that one more. And then you kind of like are wasting too much time doing the task you like. And then you're trying to get back to like, okay, what was that important one again? I need to do that right now. So yeah, so I think those are like a quick summary of these like 7 different things you can struggle with for ADHD brain. But yeah, it's definitely interesting to learn about for sure.
It's interesting because I think entrepreneurship and web design in particular is probably what, as we've talked about, like one of the best options for an ADHD brain on any, level of the spectrum. But also it's almost like pouring gasoline on the fire because it's like all of this stuff could get out of control with the freedom to run a business. And then suddenly you're the decision maker on all this. So how have you have you had to kind of separate yourself when you're making some of these executive decisions? Like, are you able to focus and be the CEO for even just a little bit, just to like do the deadlines, do the executive work, and then be able to give yourself credit? Like, have you so far, and I know you're early on in this journey, but like, have you been able to kind of help step into different roles a little bit more as you know, when you become a business owner, you're CEO, creative director, designer, support, HR. So again, it kind of goes back to the idea of like, it's an amazing opportunity what we have, but also it's like naturally as a business owner, you're almost kind of by nature ADHD because suddenly you are doing this, then you're doing that, then you're doing that, then you're doing that. And there's no other way to go about it unless you have other people in those roles.
And I've definitely, now that I have strategies, it's way easier. So like, without knowing I had it, I think that was just the confusing part where I just kind of thought I was going crazy. I'm like, why am I not getting all this stuff like accomplished as how I want it? It's a little chaotic, your mind. So once you have strategies, which I'll go through some of these ones that have been working for me and other ones that are out there, it gets way easier. Like a big one is really just trying to a daily task list. Sounds easy, right? Everyone just makes a daily task list. Well, I was having problems with that because I just absolutely hate making a daily task list. Mm-hmm. I now know it's because that ADHD brain hates like kind of tasks to do, I guess. Like it's not an exciting thing writing that task list, but forcing myself into that has helped a bunch. Just making sure you have the tasks. I've been trying to write them out like a week in advance, which I wasn't exactly doing beforehand. Daily task lists. They've got a bunch of task management apps you can use too, which is the technology is also good in that way. Like there's a lot of things that can help you. And on the positive technology is like how I figured out all this information. So like there is the positives of technology, but definitely can be distracting as well.
Yeah. And I guess earlier I should clarify when I was talking about technology, I was more so thinking about social media and just entertainment and how fast we get so much information and so much dopamine hits that it's like, I can't imagine that does not lead to some variation of ADHD, even if it's light, even from the lighter side.
Yeah. It's a spectrum. So probably everyone's getting a little bit in there. And then you got like an accountability partner you can use. So you can just send somebody like your task list for the day or whatnot, or for the week, which I've been doing with Josh here, just sending him like a weekly task list reminder. Not like he's got to go through and check off everything and check on me, but that just gives your own mind like accountability, like, okay, I want to look like I'm being productive and getting this stuff done. So that's super helpful. They also have,
I imagine there's something to just almost like, it's like working out. You're going to do stuff more if you're like, hey, I'm going to, like right now we're doing a movement challenge in pro, and I've been much more consistent at doing push-ups because I committed to doing push-ups,
right.
and I publicly said, I'm going to do 50 push-ups a day.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like the social,
I imagine
like a social aspect to it, to where, you know, you want to be like productive and getting things done. And, you know, somebody knows that this is what you're trying to do, you know, so they can check in on you if you're not getting that stuff accomplished. Body doubling. I haven't done this one, but I know people with ADHD that swear it works, which is where, like, say you're at work or you work from home, I work from home. It's literally just like showing up either to like a coffee shop together or just at their house. It kind of keeps you on task because you don't want to be, I think it's like another social thing where you like don't want to be seen scrolling your phone all day while you're supposed to be working, more or less, even if it's not the same field or anything. They said that one can be super helpful. I haven't tried that one out, but people swear by it. So,
side note, this is probably, again, I am 100% self-diagnosing myself. I no doubt by going through this have some level of ADHD, but I think it's one reason I love coffee shops, particularly for like when my coaching in pro, when I do DM coaching, I often have a really hard time focusing on that in my office for whatever reason. Whether it's, and even though I love it, sometimes it is monotonous and sometimes, quite frankly, boring if I'm like, I'm not really feeling this right now, but I'm going to be respectful of a member who's coaching with me to make sure I give them a detailed response. But when I'm in a coffee shop, it changes everything for me. So all that to say, like double clicking on that idea of almost changing your surrounding, I would imagine that could be super helpful.
Actually, that is a good one as well. Just changing your surrounding up for ADHD, because you don't like monotony, more or less. So if you just keep working in the same area, it might become boring to you. So kind of switching up that routine a little bit to get some dopamine rush of being in a new place, getting back to like the norm, and then, cranking out some work. And they do have, I would say like getting started on tasks, which I feel like I struggle with for some tasks, is just setting a 2-minute alarm on your phone and just saying, I am doing this for 2 minutes. Because usually once you start that task, it keeps going because it's easy to do once you start. It's literally like feeling like you're going to die just trying to start the task. But if you just set a 2-minute alarm, it's worked for me. Just 2 minutes, being like, I'm going to focus for 2 minutes and then I can do whatever I want. But usually that just leads straight into doing more things. So that's been a helpful one.
That's great. I imagine it's like a quick win, a little bit of dopamine just by getting it started, but there's less pressure to be like, I got to do this for 3 hours, which is probably,
another one, since the ADHD brain is wired for like that instant reward. When you're doing like a long project and, you know, the only next reward is like giving it off to the person and getting paid or whatnot. You've got a lot of time in between that. One of the things to do daily, because I think if you have ADHD, because your working memory is a little off, is like you kind of forget how many things you accomplished throughout the day. So just simple things like this, you can just use like paper clips, just have 2 bowls, you know, just fill one with paper clips. Anytime you complete a small task, anything, take a paper clip out, put it in the bowl next to it. So at the end of the day, if you feel like I've done nothing, you can at least look like, oh, I've got a full bowl of paper clips on my productive side. So that's been.
What are you using, Rob, for the for your project management and task stuff? Are you doing Basecamp or Asana?
Yeah, I actually just started Basecamp, but I'm very new into it. So
the only reason I mention that is I've found when I actually get stuff out of my head and into a task list, even if it's just like little projects, like project goals, same thing. Well, you go back and you look at the completed, checked off to-dos, and it's like, holy cow, I did way more this week or this month than I gave myself credit for. So just another little tip for everyone who's using a task list or a roadmap or a goal list is to do something like that and just look at your completed. It's like, holy crap.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. That'll give you that should give you some endorphins right there.
And
for sure.
For anyone listening right now, and they maybe don't know if they have ADHD or not, if you're listening to this list of things that can help you and you absolutely hate everything on this list, you probably have ADHD. Because before I knew I had it, any of these mentions, I would have been like, vomit, this sounds awful, which it does sound awful, but you do need the strategies. They do work. You just got to figure out which ones work for you. But definitely when I would listen to anybody on a podcast be like, this is what you should do to start your day or whatever, I'd be like, oh, I hate the sound of that. Like, it's just that routine type thing.
Why did I was just going to say, why did so many of these sound bad? Routine.
You don't want to be told. You're kind of out of the box thinker. So you're like, I don't need to listen to these people. I can do this and that and that. But it does help. But that's one thing for sure. I'd always be like,
I mean, look, Rob, until you reached out to me and got into web design, you were like 2 months away from just being a drifter, walking in between cities with a big old backpack and
exactly.
Just wherever the wind takes me, baby.
Exactly. So, and an interesting one is, you know how people say, like, do your hardest task first. This is what you hear your whole life. Do the hardest task first, then the rest of your day, you're fine. But if you have ADHD, starting that task can be so hard that they actually say reverse. Do a task you like to do first, then you'll have some momentum and just go straight into that awful task. So that was an interesting one for me because I always felt like growing up like, oh my God, the hardest task first. Why would I ever do that? And I feel like it would literally like make me delay the start of my day by like a couple hours because I'm just like, oh God, that sounds terrible. And then... So those are some good strategies.
We'll have all these in the show notes, by the way. I know we're both looking at the strategy list, which is great. Like, this is great stuff.
Yeah. So very interesting. And they did say like good sense of humor. They said a lot of people with ADHD have a good sense of humor because their brain's been firing weird their whole life. So they've been like thinking things are funny. And actually a lot of stand-up comedians have ADHD because they're kind of observing the world in a different view. And then can kind of put it into words better than most people.
That makes total sense. Yeah.
And I would like to say, because I know going through the list of ADHD symptoms, you're like, is there anything good about ADHD? There is, my friend. So let me read a couple of good things. Well, the one thing, hyperfocus. If you are interested in a subject, you can literally crank out 2 weeks worth of work in one day, no problem. So that's an awesome superpower to have if you have ADHD. Sometimes you can't always funnel it, but it is a good superpower to have. And then also you're more into like, you want to experience more things. So you're definitely an open person. You're definitely good at traveling. You're definitely good with new experiences. You want to experience things. I always think like reading through the list of like qualities of ADHD person, I'm like, they're probably fun because they're having a good time. They're not a square, more or less. Like they're going to take some risk, which is also how you can end up in like entrepreneurship and all this exciting stuff. So that's exciting. Because your mind is more adapted for chaos than most because it's kind of been craving it without you knowing it or not for the dopamine rush. Is you are like really well suited for like some jobs that people are not. So one of them is entrepreneurship, obviously, because of the like risk reward of that, or like sales you can be really good at. But also if you're in a medical field type setting, like firefighting, EMT, there's a bunch, and you can get this like online, just like a list of like good career fields as well. Maybe you're a little confused of what you're attempting to do currently. Hopefully you're doing web design, but if you're still kind of thinking about it, they do have like lists of like good career fields to have for ADHD people, because they kind of need like with web design, it's great because you can jump around to different things. So if you are getting a little bored doing one thing, you can jump to something that's a little more exciting for you.
And I was going to say too, as a web designer, I'm sure you've seen this already in the couple of years I've been doing it, but large part of what we do is problem solving.
Yeah.
And those problems are very rarely exactly the same. So it's often like, ooh, this is similar. So it doesn't mean I need to change a career, but this is a little bit different. I mean, gosh, there's really not too many web designers who are bored,
right,
unless they're literally, I don't know any web designer who is bored.
And it is, I'm interrupting of my excitement here, but
we'll blame it on the Wi-Fi connection. Yeah. We'll say
Wi-Fi lagging. I can't hear you. No, I was going to say another good quality with ADHD is like we like to be challenged, because once something seems normal or once it's status quo, we are bored. So like this field is really good because you are constantly learning. Like there's new technologies, there's new ways to do stuff. Like you want a challenge. You're not just going to be like the average person just working in a cubicle all day. Like you need something to fire up the dopamine levels. So I think that's really good, because I think it makes you like open to learning stuff. And with ADHD, you are open to learning stuff. So it is a good power to have.
I don't want to take us too off topic here, but I'm just thinking like, what the hell did people do before the internet? Who there was just most jobs were going to be some semblance of a like very routine. You show up, you do your task every day, and then you go home, you do the task every day. I can't help but wonder if people in prior decades, obviously this applies to now, but especially before the internet, when you could make your own thing and potentially do a lot of this and make money from it and make a career from it. I wonder if that spurred a lot of just wild behavior, like having an affair at work, or doing some wild shit just because you are just bored out of your mind and you're just barely able to get through, or alcoholism. Maybe you're just like drinking like crazy just because you're just so bored out of your mind doing the same thing every day.
Yeah.
You can't help but wonder if maybe
it did say so with that, because you like new experiences and also because you do hate the norm of everyday life, you are a lot more high risk to have you can have like an addiction to something, like even like the internet, like you were saying earlier. You can be addicted to that way easier than somebody without ADHD, because those dopamine releases that you're getting. So especially probably before people knew what this was at all. Like I imagine that'd be a very confusing time. You might have a couple drinks after work to get the dopamine back up, and then that leads right into alcoholism or some riskier behavior like that. I think like teen pregnancy and unwanted pregnancy type things are a lot higher for people with ADHD, because they're thinking of that dopamine rush of the act and not what could happen later in life, more or less. So there are definitely some riskier behaviors associated with that. And an interesting thing, because it is hereditary, interesting thing was that like ADHD back in the day was awesome when it was like a tribal community, because who's going to be the person to explore anything that's scary? The ADHD person, no problem. They'll go out there, check it out, see if it's scary. Who's going to try that berry we don't know is poisonous? The ADHD person. I don't mind that risk. And their brains are thinking differently than everyone else's, so they're a little more likely to like spot like an animal in the woods or some danger or something that neurotypical people might not be paying attention to. But then the negative side is that society nowadays was formed by the neurotypical people. So that's why.
So what you're saying, Robbie, is that Moana is ADHD for sure.
Yes. I'm saying I could be Moana if it was a couple of decades
Robbie
ago.
Is the bearded Moana.
But yeah, so that's kind of interesting, because it is like
that's hereditary.
Yeah. So they did say like that's why it's around nowadays. But the problem is society is kind of built around a neurotypical lifestyle. So that's why
it makes total sense that, especially in the case of like a tribal lifestyle, that you need some wild people who are just built differently and who think differently.
Out there that want to explore the surroundings.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And you need people who are just fine with like, just tell me what to do and I'll just stay here. I don't want to go anywhere. I just want to stay here.
Right.
Those people work together really, really well. Like my wife is definitely on the side of like, she just likes having a task list. Like everything that fires her up is dreadful to me.
There we go. Yeah,
so we make a really good team.
Not be happy to see it.
Yes. But and I will say, like, I totally understand, and I think particularly our school system, which is, it's no secret that for years people here have been talking about how dated our school system is. It was literally for the industrial age. Like, you're teaching kids to just sit in line and do their task and clock out at 5 and they go home. Like, the reality is, I think there's probably been a variety of roles that suited ADHD people on any metric of the spectrum, like you mentioned, like the different careers, firefighting, urgent care, stuff like that. But I just think that those were probably not as prevalent as they are now. Like, I feel like there's just a lot more opportunity now for the people who are not going to be a good accountant and are not going to be able to just, thrive in just doing the same task every day.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Very interesting to learn about. And I actually so my siblings are teachers. I was telling like my sister, all the stuff I learned, she was like, whoa, I would have never suspected this is like what ADHD is. Cause again, like even myself 6 months ago, I thought like, okay, a kid that can't be controlled in class, that's your ADHD, but it's a lot more than that. There's a lot more subtleties to it. And again, like women definitely get underdiagnosed because they usually don't have that hyperactivity. So usually there's a lot more women later in life that kind of get diagnosed with ADHD because of that. So it's, definitely. And like you were saying, like if you're in class and the subject's boring to you and you have ADHD, it's like 10 times harder to keep focused, to pay attention, especially when there's like a song going on in your head. There's a squirrel outside. There's a lot of good stuff going on other than that class. So it's interesting.
Yeah. Man, when something, to your point, since we're on the positive end of the spectrum here, when you find something you really enjoy, that, like you said, you could bust it out, whereas some people it would take forever. You probably just go. I would imagine too, this is probably where people get so focused on something that they don't want to stop until it's done.
Yeah.
Which is also a challenge because sometimes you just got to, if a project's going to take 40 hours, you can't just work 40 hours straight. But I often think about like directors of movies and folks who do a project that may be extended that are just like, that's it. They're just living in that world. I went through this as a course creator. There were times where like, if I'm making a course, it's hard for me to focus on anything else. I just want to do that course. I could do it for 8 hours a day. But I've got to do some other stuff at some point too, sometimes.
Right. And you kind of feel like I'm in the zone. Like, let's just crank this out. Like, so I feel like that is like that hyper focus side, which can be good and bad. Cause you kind of are like, let's do it all right now, which is a superpower. Cause I do feel like in college and stuff, it'd be like, this is due next week or in 2 months. And then I'm not starting it until like the night before, but you literally crank out the whole thing and you get like a decent grade, maybe not as good as you could have had, but like you're still passing college. You're like, that's not too bad. Like, that is an interesting mindset that makes way more sense now that I know I have ADHD.
Yeah. Well, this has been very eye-opening here, Robbie. This is cool, man. I figured you'd be on the podcast at some point. I thought it would be about a case study or a success story. I didn't think this would be it, but after our chat and our last pro meetup, I was like, man, and like I mentioned, I was like, I've just having so many of these conversations that I feel like I needed to take some time to dig into this, but I really didn't want to just have like an ADHD coach on to get started in this. I appreciate, hearing from you, one of my friends who has a different perspective on this. So yeah, listen, man, I really appreciate you being transparent and open about all this. I think it's going to help a lot of people.
Yeah, for sure. I figured if I can help one person out there that's maybe struggling and trying to figure their own mind out, so that's enough for me. So appreciate you having me on here for sure.
Yeah. And I got one final question here for you, Robbie, but I do want to say real quick, like, I do think this is important because and again, I'm totally self-diagnosing here, but I felt odd in school because like I did see, like my brother, who's a year and a half younger, we were in the same math class because I just sucked at math and hated it and was so bored and I just really struggled with a lot of typical academia, and I felt weird. I remember my guidance counselor made me feel like I was a total failure for not wanting to go to a 4-year degree. And I just was like, I like drums. I want to focus on drums. I like music. I want to do this. That's all I want to do. Yeah. And I felt like an outcast in a lot of ways. I saw all these other people getting good grades and not having my trains of thought that I did, but I do feel like it's good that it's not only more accepted, but understood now, maybe more so. And it's really, really cool that there's just so many opportunities to be able to have a good understanding of this stuff, but then more importantly, like channel it and funnel. You've talked about that a lot. You've used the word funnel, like how to channel and funnel these things into a more positive approach.
Right.
So,
and once you have like the strategies, the hardest part is if you don't know you have it, because then you're just kind of making all these decisions and not really piecing together why you're making them. So I would say if you do think you possibly have it, get checked out by a doctor and they can kind of assess where to go from there. But there's definitely a bunch of good strategies, and it's not like you have to take medicine or anything like that, but that's also a helpful tool, at least to kind of to right the ship if you're kind of in your head a little bit. So it's definitely, I'd say any, mental health stuff, if you're struggling with it, definitely good to get checked out by a professional. But it has definitely helped me out a ton since learning about it about like 6 months ago. So I'm way happier where I'm at now than I was before that.
Heck yeah, dude. One final question here for you, Robbie, but real quick, everything that we went over is you put, again, thank you for putting this incredible little document, this little 5-page PDF. I'll make sure we include this in the show notes. We'll make it free too. So no, it's not an email sign up or anything, but this is courtesy of Rob. Do you want to send me a separate version that has like your website and stuff on there in case people want to?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Connect with you.
Check me out. Vivid Pine Designs. I'm based out of Columbus, Ohio. Josh has been a great mentor and friend, helped me through it. And then, check me out. I'm loving every bit of it. And now I've got my mind on the right track as far as the business side as well. So I'm super excited about the future.
vividpinedesign.com.
Yep.
And again, we'll have this PDF in the show notes so people can just download. No email sign up, or unless you want to have people. Do you want to build an email list of web designers? I don't know.
I don't know if I need an email list of web designers, but they do have like any questions. You can always give me my information. I'll try to get back with them as much as possible.
Sweet.
Yeah.
What is the biggest difference, to wrap this up, between Rob now and Rob this time last year?
Oh man. Actually, I'd say like having a better place goal and like steps to get there. And I would also say, just honestly, not thinking I'm crazy anymore, because I was really thinking I was going a little bit off the deep end. So that's been like just knowing you have ADHD and being like, that makes so much sense. And then having the strategies to deal with it are a lot better. So I feel like a way brighter outlook on the future than I was probably a year ago.
Does your dad have it? I can't imagine old Tommy. I don't know him that well, but
yeah, I don't want to,
because wasn't he a forest ranger or
another great career for ADHD, but I'm not sure exactly. And I'm not going to diagnose anybody, but it's pretty much, since it's a little newer, like a lot of people have masked, their ADHD symptoms over time. So a lot of people that probably had it and didn't know about it could be struggling more internally, but have made it through life without needing it. But yeah, I'm just happy I've got it figured out now. So yeah, I don't know if my parents have it, or probably someone in my family tree do for sure, because it is pretty hereditary. But they did say like outdoor stuff is good for ADHD, so you can thrive in that environment as well. But yeah,
I would imagine even just naturally getting dopamine from, sun and just good outdoors time. Like I imagine, yeah, absolutely. That's only a benefit.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome, dude. This has been great, Robbie. Dude, thank you for your time, man. And again, congrats on everything you're up to. This is awesome, and I'm pumped to help you continue on, man.
Yeah, I'm pumped for the journey. Thanks for having me on here. I really appreciate it. And I just hope, as long as this helps one person, well worth it for sure. So
it helped me. So even if we don't release this publicly, I feel this is
actually
awesome.
just
This is great.
Oh wait, we're just on a Zoom call. My bad.
Yeah, no, man. Maybe we could do the next chat in person too. Once,
sure.
Once you're able to be around kids again after the whole Chuck E. Cheese thing.
1 year from now, we set up another one, and I can let you know where I'm at.
Deal. Sounds great, dude. Rob, thanks, man. Until we hit the courts together. Yeah, man.
Another championship coming.
Yeah, baby.
All right. Thanks, Josh.
All right, friend. Well, again, I really hope you enjoyed this one. I hope it helped if you find yourself on the spectrum of, I guess, light ADHD or heavy ADHD. I don't know what the correct terminology is, but you may be diagnosed officially now. You may be somebody who is like, sounds like somebody called me out. So either way, regardless of whether you seek professional help or if you're like me and you feel like you're getting by, but you definitely could use some of these strategies to help remain focused, then I hope everything that we covered here helps. I want to give a big shout out and a thanks to Rob for being very open about this. I know he's super passionate about this, and I have seen a noticeable change in him over the past few months here. So be sure to pick up the resources that he put together for you. It's going to be found at joshhall.co/364, where the show notes and links and everything mentioned are going to be. And that PDF guide that he put together is completely free. You don't even need to sign up for it. It's just go to the show notes, click and download. We wanted to make sure that was widely available for everyone who wants to get a more deep dive about what Rob has learned on this. So really appreciate him. Be sure to check him out. You can go to his website at vividpinedesign.com is his web design agency. And we will have everything linked in the show notes, along with the PDF mentioned at joshhall.co/364. And again, you're seeing somebody who is fully empowered and supported in my community, Web Designer Pro. So if you'd like to meet Rob and get coaching from me and help stay focused and have a supportive network behind you, I highly recommend that you join us in Web Designer Pro. Head over to webdesignerpro.com to join at any tier that works for you. The courses tier to learn about everything you need to go through my courses and get your business off the ground. The community tier for support and to be a part of the pro community. And if you want coaching directly with me, we still have a little bit of space right now in the coaching tier. So I'll see you in Web Designer Pro. And again, show notes with the PDF that Rob put together, joshhall.co/364. Cheers, my friends.